care, nobody knows.
Say hello, I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Saturday, July 13th. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We don't do prayers or buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, and politics, and identity. And we may step on a few toes along the way, but our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us, and we do it all right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. I've got Ed Schindler in studio, and we're going to talk about a couple of different things. But before we get started, let me remind people that this show does stream live, as far as audio goes, on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. We stream live video of the show on Facebook Live. So if you are catching our audio and you want to see our shining faces, you can go to Facebook. We're on a bunch of different group pages, so we're easy to find, especially if you are on any of the Native group pages. So we are probably too. So you can find us easy enough. We do take the show's audio and we post it up on SoundCloud afterwards, which not only leaves it available for downloads on SoundCloud, but it also puts it on your favorite podcast platforms where you can also download the show. We take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. And you are welcome to share those videos and check out the videos of this show, the show I do in New York, and some of our short form videos. As I said, I'm John Kane, and I am the show's host and producer. I'm joined in studio by Jake Proud, who is managing our audio and our sound. I said that again, audio and our video. And of course, I've got Ed Schindler in studio with us as well. Well, let me first start off. Today was an interesting day. I went down to the Erie Basin Marina, where a replica of the Santa Maria was docked, and the whole, again, the ship has been making the rounds, and it's been around for a couple of years, actually. I think, even. In various places, and it gets met with some different receptions along the way. And of course, white people love the damn thing. So when we show up there, and I show up there, and I've got my warrior shirt on, and my indigenous hat on, and some folks show up, other Native people show up, and other people who have been joining us in our fight against the celebration of Columbus Day or Columbus period. And we're carrying signs that say things like genocide and slavery and, rape and all that other stuff that Columbus is clearly associated with. We are not always received that well by some of the general non-Native public. But it does give us an opportunity to engage them. And, sometimes that engagement can be a little caustic, but other times we can have a real exchange of ideas. As it turns out, one of the folks that came out to speak with us was one of the crew members of this Santa Maria. And, and he tried to dismiss, tried to almost separate Columbus and the genocide that would follow his arrival to this hemisphere with just the idea that they've got this beautiful boat that they've recreated. And I said, well, you can't come here with one of a replica of one of Columbus's vessels and not expect there to be a reaction to what Columbus brought, what this vessel did. I said, this represents one of the first slave ships that entered the Western Hemisphere. And I said, not to bring slaves, but to take our people back. This ship may have had a little girl raped right inside it. This ship represents. I said, well, not this one, because the Santa Maria sunk in the harbor in the Caribbean. Well, regardless, it was a part of three ships that did transport not just slaves, but in particular young girls, because that was the hot commodity to bring back to Europe. So these guys who came on these ships, Columbus and his men, and Columbus is always illustrated as being this pious, God-fearing, put the banner in the ground for the Catholic Church, right? In the meantime, this is a guy who committed all kinds of heinous acts against these people. And it was about greed. It was about gold. It was about, making money off of this thing. So anyway, we had an interesting conversation, and of course, the immediate response and the crew members from Spain, so these guys made the trip right from Spain to to the Americas, and he's trying to treat this like, well, yeah, but that was a long time ago. So yeah, but we still have issues today. I says, you sailed this from Spain? He says, yes. I says, well, how interesting is that? You could actually get on a ship and you could come to the United States. You could come to our country, our lands, and you're free to do that. He goes, yeah. I says, it's funny, I can't go to your country. And he says, what do you mean you can't go to my country? I says, I cannot travel to Europe. In fact, I can't travel outside of the United States, as far as Canada and the United States are concerned, unless I carry their passport, unless I renounce who I am and my own identity, accept the imposition of U.S. or Canadian citizenship, and travel with their documents. And it's not just the United States and Canada. Your country won't accept me either. So your country could send you off on a voyage, to put this ship on display, the ship that is a part of the beginning of a 500-year genocide. And yet, funny thing is, I can't go to your country. I said, so when you tell me this is about a ship, a 500-year-old ship, no, it's about what this ship has brought here for 500 years. That's what the issue is over. So, I mean, that was the conversation. And look, and I said, I have no ill will against you as a crew member. But he saw our banners of things like murder and genocide, and he goes, that hurts me. I says, why? Do you think I'm calling you a rapist? Do you think that's what we're doing here? I says, what the ship represents are those acts. But if you're offended by it, I'm offended that you're offended by it. Because you want to come here and you want to heroize this vessel. You want to heroize this journey. I mean, he started telling me, he goes, "Oh yeah, these men had to be on this ship for this many months, and they they're literally just drinking water and eating worms." They weren't just drinking water either. I'll bet you had the ship was loaded down with plenty of rum, because that's what showed up here: a bunch of drunks and a bunch of rapists. So when we get into the conversation about who Columbus really was and what these ships represented, and of course he doesn't disagree, and he actually comes around a little bit, but at first, at first glance, he's just not happy with the idea that we're there with these words that represent truth, but are not comfortable. There are some inconvenient truths.
Yeah, they didn't like the portrayal, and therefore it extended to them in his mind. And unfortunately, that a lot of the things that were done by that voyage have still portrayed and still extend.
Well, and again, for me to talk about the passport issue, I says, you have to understand this is in 1913, and I've talked about this on the show before, but in 1913, the idea of stripping away somebody's nationhood and imposing on others was considered a war crime. By after World War I, that war crime, that denationalization, would be called genocide. I says, we're still experiencing it today. We are still suffering with missing and murdered Indigenous women, just like the ones that got taken in ships just like that. I said, we're still experiencing, some of the oppression and the poverty that those ships brought to our lands. And so, I mean, that's the conversation to have, and that's one we did have. But it's interesting because, this ship, this isn't the first time it's docked. This is here in Buffalo. It's been here for, I guess, a week. So it was our first opportunity to give a counter narrative to the one that that this crew is, and I'll tell you, the whole time that he's there talking to me, one of his other crew members is grabbing him by the arm trying to pull him away. I mean, they did not. I mean, the rest of his crew did not want to engage this conversation, and so that was interesting in of itself. and of course the non-native visitors, the ones who are all happy to go see the tall ships and the canal side and all that other stuff, and wanted to go visit the Santa Maria, they were particularly offended that we were there, and you could hear them speaking in negative terms about us being idiots and protesters and that kind of stuff. I mean, telling their children. Although a few people said, well, there's that, and so a few people kind of accepted, but I would say by and large, most of the white people that were there to visit the Santa Maria were kind of pissed that we were there, and they expressed it. And the cops were doing their job. They were telling us try not to block the sidewalks and that kind of stuff. And we had a decent engagement with the police officers that were there. But then also we had a crew that came by water. They came in the kayaks and the canoes, and Darylyn was singing, and she had a hand drum, and it was just to listen to how that sound of the drumming and the singing, how it came across the water. Water has a there's a great effect that water has on sound, and our music and our voices and our drum has a tendency to really travel across that water. So before we could even see them, we could hear the drum and hear the voice. So it was great. And so we basically had some folks in the water around the ship, and then we had some folks on the land, and and I thought we were respectful. Obviously, if you hang a banner that says genocide, rape, and murder, and that kind of stuff, I mean, that's just the truth. I mean, and I know that's the crazy part is what people fail to realize is that the reason we know this stuff is because these guys wrote all that stuff down. I mean, the fact that Columbus actually paid his men with little girls, gave some of his men, some young girls to beat into submission until they could turn them into sex slaves. I mean, that's some of the reality, and it's documented. I mean, one of his captains talked about what it took to turn her into into his little muse, and and that's they actually wrote this stuff down because they weren't embarrassed by it. They dehumanized us enough that in their minds that they could do these things, and of course with them they brought venereal diseases. They brought violence and greed and all kinds of other things. So. But the other thing is that there is a bit of a backstory. Like I said, this isn't the first place it docked, and apparently this thing, this docked at a friend. I have a friend up in Akwesasne who's been here on the show, Loran Thompson. This thing docked at his marina on the St. Lawrence, and you know what? The folks at Akwesasne were actually probably a lot more gracious than we were here. I mean, they were actually, they'd done some outreach to them, tried to talk to them, tried to engage with them. From what I understand, they gave them a flag to fly. And now, some people said that they gave them a Hiawatha flag or a Haudenosaunee flag to fly while they were in Akwesasne. But the fact of the matter is, if they were really given this flag to fly, they should have had that flag flown the whole time that they were in Haudenosaunee territory. And they certainly didn't have it flying when they were here in Buffalo. So there was that. And again, I have some friends in Akwesasne who said they tried to reach out and be amicable with these folks, and but they were pretty standoffish. Maybe they're expecting more of the reception that we gave. Now they also came as they came across Lake Ontario, they made it to Rochester, and from what I understand, the Native American Services a community services organization was prepared to give them a plaque. Now, it doesn't quite make sense to me, but apparently what this plaque was it was a written apology, although apparently the Native people wrote the apology for the crew of the Santa Maria, and then it was an acceptance of an apology. So they crafted the apology and then I guess, accepted the apology all in one. And so there was a plaque commemorating this exchange of forgiveness, I guess. And so they accepted it, and and that all made some paper. So they got two fairly warm receptions from some Native folks in both in Akwesasne and Rochester. And And then we showed up. And then we showed up, and it wasn't quite as friendly. Now, the interesting thing is, and this is, again, part of the backstory, and look, people can dispute whether this is the truth or not, but from what I understand, the very guy that I was engaged with in a conversation, and it was a pretty long conversation, and it was caught on videotape. There was an Italian film crew that's been filming some of this Santa Maria stuff. They were right there, camera right there, catching this conversation. But the guy that I was engaged with this conversation came back out. I left, after an hour and a half or something like that. I left. I had some stuff I had to do, so I spoke my piece and made my presence known there. But so this crew member who was being whisked away by some of his other crewmates engaged guys like Joe Hill and Nate Buckley, some of the other folks that were there, and apparently said something to the effect that this plaque that they had gotten, I don't know what they call his captain, I don't know what his senior officers threw it away. They threw it away. So this gracious, almost too gracious as far as I'm concerned, gesture that was offered by Native people in Rochester just made it to a dumpster. According to this crew member, that's what he told our folks that were there. Now, it makes you wonder: is that the same place that the Hiawatha Belt flag, the Haudenosaunee flag that they were giving up on Akwesasne? Did that end up in the same dumpster or a different dumpster? I don't know, but it just kind of so even as these folks are making these tours, and I assume they're making money, they're probably charging admission. I don't know, but. And they're being sponsored by various things. You can see when they are engaged positively or with a little bit of acrimony, they are regarding us as as the enemy. And so even as when people are graciously offering an olive branch, I guess, you can see how they took it. They took it and they tossed it in the trash afterwards. And they certainly didn't put it on display. So, and maybe that's what the guys in Rochester thought. Maybe that's what the folks at Akwesasne thought, that we'll give them a Haudenosaunee flag. We'll almost in Eastern Door, the Mohawks. We'll give them a Haudenosaunee flag, and they'll fly that flag while they're traversing our territories. Well, that didn't happen. They might have put it up for a picture in Akwesasne, but then it probably ended up in the same place as this plaque from Rochester. So it kind of shows you how they really feel about us. And so when we engage folks like this, whether it's we're talking about the Columbus statues that that are still all over the place in every major city, including Buffalo. Whether we're supporting the efforts to change Columbus Day into Indigenous Peoples Day, and frankly, I'm not even saying that it has to be Indigenous Peoples Day. I'm just saying celebrating Columbus Day is a farce, because for one thing, even the Italian Americans who want to claim him as their patron saint or whatever else, he never made it to New York. He never made it to North America. In fact, he died believing that he had still reached the eastern islands of the Indies of Indonesia. I mean, I don't think he ever accepted the fact that he hadn't reached his goal. And so put that in perspective. So this guy miscalculated the size of the Earth almost by half. Certainly by one full, an ocean and a half, and a full continent. So this speculative journey that he thought he was going to, embark on, that would, enable him to have a faster route to for the riches of trade that would come from the east. It just never materialized, because he actually was sailing farther away from India and the spice routes and all that other stuff than closer to it. He was closer to India and even Indonesia, when he was in the port in Spain, than at any other time during his journey, because he was actually sailing farther away. Never even came close. I mean, so this wasn't some great navigator, because he was not only defying the conventional wisdom. Well, look, whether conventional wisdom could have foreseen that there was another landmass isn't the issue. But the conventional wisdom was that you could not make it to the to the East Indies by sailing west. At least not make it a shorter trip. Most people had already calculated fairly accurately that not only was the Earth round, but that it was that its size was such that it would have been a much longer journey through not just unknown waters and obviously unknown lands, to go all the way around. I mean, I don't think it was unimaginable that because the Earth was round that you could get there eventually, but it wasn't a shorter trip. So Columbus was wrong. He was very wrong, and so his speculative journey was a bust. The only thing that came out of it was the church awarding this discovery of land to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, awarding them the land. The church did that, and of course opened up this idea of making Native people slaves. First, to try to grab every piece of wealth they could off of the Caribbean islands that these white men had gone to, and of course, bringing a bunch of them in chains back to Spain to be sold off as sex slaves or the various other purposes.
I think there's one very important thing to look at, and that's that kids as young as 10 years old have learned Columbus and all that, as far as what they teach in their curriculum. But they don't teach them about the genocide, the slavery, the rapists, the rapes that were carried out by them, and how those aspects were ordained by the church, as well as by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. That those are things that are neglected to be taught, and therefore people look at these ones who are objecting to this display and calling them basically idiots, when the fact is that they're the ones who are idiots in terms of history. Okay, that is one thing that people have to come to awareness of, because there's a whole bunch of that hidden away in U.S. history.
Yeah.
At least hidden from the people who are taking their school system.
Well, I do have a comment here. It looks like Ronald Garrow, who is no fan of me or my show necessarily, said that there was no. Let me see. He says there was no acceptance of forgiveness in Rochester. There was a meeting with the crew of this ship, and the effects of the Columbus voyage and colonization were explained to them. Well, they didn't sound like they knew anything about it when we had talked to them. They did fly the flag in Rochester after they were asked why they didn't, why they did not have it flying. After the meeting, the crew were presented the plaque. And now, again, nobody's explaining to me what this plaque actually said, but from what I understand, the plaque was very, very gracious, and let's see, and we're asked to display it on the ship. Well, just for the record, it isn't displayed on the ship, and according to one of the crew members, the plaque was discarded. So, again, I know the folks in Rochester were trying to be very, very gracious to these guys, and apparently it didn't work out so well. According to the crew member that I spoke to, they didn't keep this. Neither did they keep this plaque on display, nor do they have the Haudenosaunee flag on display. So whether they discarded the flag or not, I don't know. But according to this crew member, they did discard the plaque. So maybe some of the folks from Rochester can post a picture of what that plaque actually was, so we all understand it, because it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me as it was explained to me. So maybe the information that I got was wrong, and I very much can accept the fact that the information that I got was wrong. But they were. Again, according to Ronald Garrow, who was a part of the crew there that I'm sure engaged these guys, they did give them a plaque to put on display, although this crew decided not to put it on display after all. But again, this is part of the reason. I saw some people post some things. It's all I did a whole show in New York on Get Over It, right? And I see some of our old people say, "Well, we've got to let the bygones be bygones, and we've got to put that stuff in the past, and we've got to show forgiveness." You know, I'll tell you, and you know, one of the things that Degger Rundige and others tell me all the time, there's no word in Mohawk, and I don't know if there's a word in Seneca for forgiveness. You know, so I don't know. You know, when people are suggesting this, this is obviously a Christian influence. You know, there is through the code of Handsome Lake, they began this idea of repentance, which is essentially like asking for forgiveness, but that's not an original part of our culture. So this idea of creating or getting a resolution and resolving a conflict and getting reaching a level of understanding, sure, that's always been a part of it. You know, that's the idea of maintaining peace that we talked about last week. This idea that peace isn't a noun, it's a verb, it's a process, it's the idea of restoring balance. Well, you know, and again, as I said in my show in New York, we can't talk about getting over it if the genocide continues. And as long as we're going to still have the same, the same conflicts with New York State, you know, trying to squeeze us, not just New York State. I just saw the whole article in Oklahoma about the governor of Oklahoma trying to squeeze all the native gaming operations for revenue sharing there. And it's almost this acceptance in the legal community that, yeah, IGRA is bad. And, you know, we are in a position that we will be extorted by states for revenue sharing. Well, if that wasn't what was the original intent, you know, how do we get there? I mean, and how do we accept that? And, you know, but this is kind of what we deal with. So as we deal with the things like missing and murdered Indigenous women, as we deal with, you know, the domestic violence issues that you know, that so many of our women and our children are experiencing, we know where this stuff comes from. It comes from a history of sexualization of our women, of the rape culture that came with Columbus and his men, and every ship after that came. The idea that today we will have this debate over brown people who have been migrating through various parts of this hemisphere for thousands and thousands of years, being told by white people that you're immigrants, go home. To have a white person whose ancestry clearly comes from was not a part of a migratory pattern, it was part of an invasion for all intents and purposes. And to see the immigration policies of this country that have always favored white people. They, you know, look, it's been abusive to Asians. It's been abusive to, and even white people that they thought were too brown. I mean, when you think about how Italians were treated, you know, not just after Italy was considered one of the Axis powers, but even before that. I mean, when you consider how people of color, their only salvation was to become white enough to be accepted. So if you were a Jew, you had to convince the people that Jewish was white enough to be a part of the the white privilege. If you were Italian and you were of southern Italy, so you had the darker complexion, you had to convince people, no, you were white. But if you couldn't convince people you were white because you just weren't white enough and were never going to be white enough, then you were going to continue to feel this racism that came from the church, came from these colonizers, and is still with us today. So when people say get over it, well, look, we could argue whether slavery is really done or not. You know, when you think about the way people are forced to work in poverty, the working poor, we could argue whether slavery is really gone or not. And certainly, if you go through the rest of the world, where peoples are working for essentially slave wages, we can argue whether slavery is really gone or not. But the effects of slavery certainly are not gone. That's why we have a disproportionate number of people of color in prisons, living in poverty, living in conditions that, as Obama explained to in his Mandela eulogy, there are still people in the world, young people in the world, who live without any hope for the future. Well, yeah, and we're not just talking Africa. We're talking about young people in the inner cities here. We're talking about young people who live on every native territory, whether it's the U.S., Canada, South America, Mexico, Central America. We have our people who have been among the most persecuted and the most oppressed people on the face of the earth. All right, we're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break. This is John Kane with Ed Schindler. We'll be right back after another Murray Porter tune, I guess. What do we got? No More. Here we go. Murray Porter from his stand-up CD. This is No More. Thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. I'm here with Ed Schindler, and of course, we got Jake Proud in studio. Hey, I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, and a few others, some who choose to remain anonymous that support what we do here. And we do this twice a week. We do this twice a week from here. I also make a trip to New York every week to do a show down there on a middle of the FM dial, WBAI 99.5 in New York City. And we try to have these conversations. You know, in New York, I try to offer a native perspective to issues that transcend just our own experiences. Here, I try to talk about our issues and the issues that we're confronted with. So this idea that the now Santa Maria shows up in Buffalo and has made the rounds. And as I said, was embraced in Rochester by Ronald Garrow and company. And again, while Ronald was suggesting here in his comments that this wasn't an apology, let me see, how did he put it here? He said there was no acceptance of forgiveness in Rochester. But when I'm asking about the plaque, he says he said the crew apologized and its crew apologized to all indigenous people for the effects of the Columbus voyage. Well, that's not the way they shouldn't act that way here in Buffalo, put it that way. And he said that's what the plaque said. Well, then if they apologize and then you presented them with a plaque that says they apologized, and then you asked that the captain would display the plaque, and they said, well, we don't know that if he'll display it, and now it turns out the crew says no, he wouldn't display it. He tossed it. So, so much for gracious acceptance. But anyway, I don't know. The whole thing is kind of crazy. And look, I don't condemn people for being gracious, and I was pretty gracious with the conversation that I had with these folks too. To me, it wasn't about them, and it wasn't about a conflict or tension between myself and this crew, but trying to get them to accept. And if you did this in Rochester, it seemed like it had to be redone again here in Buffalo to accept, because they were very conflicted, it seemed. One gentleman was at least willing to engage us, but the rest of them, they didn't want any part of having a conversation with us. They were not gracious in any way, shape, or form. They didn't even mention this idea of the plaque or the flag. They didn't want it. They didn't even want to have that conversation. So, again, this is what we on the face of some things, there could be one impression, but when the backstory gets told, you realize that how some of these people really feel about us, and I think that's what was displayed by this crew, by how they dealt with both the Rochester engagement and the Akwesasne engagement. So I don't know. Look, I'm not trying to kick a dead dog here on this issue, but we will always speak out about the atrocities of Columbus. In fact, I'm going to probably do an event. Like I said, Nate Buckley was one of the guys, and his dad were part of this the crew that was out there today. And I do events on occasion at Burning Bookstore on Connecticut Avenue in Buffalo. And this fall, we're going to do. I just let it said here on the show, this film, Even the Rain, which is a Spanish language film with English subtitles. It's a great film, and we will do a screening of that film at Burning Bookstore probably in September. We'll wait till we get out of the summer months because it's hard to draw much of a crowd. But I encourage, if you are a Spanish speaker, I would very much encourage you to be a part of this screening, because you even more so than those of us who rely totally on the subtitles, maybe perhaps we'll pick up some of the nuances that we have missed. Of course, I've seen the film half dozen times, so I think I've caught most of it. But for those who will see this for the first time, it is a tremendous film. It's great in the way. Just a overview. It's a film about making a film about Columbus, but it's not a documentary. So it's a film about a crew that is filming a Christopher Columbus film. They don't do it in the Caribbean. They do it in Bolivia because it's cheaper. That's part of the storyline. They can pay the indigenous people practically nothing to give them pennies a day or whatever else, or dollars a day as extras. But while this is going on, not only is there a certain racism that this film crew who is trying to tell this horrendous story about Columbus, they too are demonstrating their racism towards the indigenous people that they're involving in the film. But while this film is going on, is a battle over water in Bolivia, where multinational corporations are trying to control the water rights and charge everybody for water, for even people who are getting water from their own wells. They were taking over both the groundwater and even the rainwater. That's why the movie is called Even the Rain. So it's a great film, and we're going to screen that film at Burning Books bookstore in this fall. So look for that, and I'll be a part of that screening. But yeah, and if look, you can find the trailer. Look for it up. Look for it on YouTube. I think the film is on Netflix. So if you want to get a chance to perhaps review the film before we screen it, the film, showing the film is one thing. Having the conversation is another thing, and that's usually part of the great engagement. At least with the films that I've screened in New York and in Long Island, that's the way it's always gone. So again, look forward to doing this film, and it'll definitely give some uncomfortable truths about Columbus and his men, not just Columbus, but and his men, including some of the bishops and the again the Catholic priests who were involved, because that's also another one of those areas that people want to. In fact, one of the commentaries that was offered on I think on the RBG, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg short form video that we put up there, someone was asking about other papal bulls that seem to repudiate the doctrine of discovery. And look, I've got to say it. There was no repudiation of the doctrine of discovery. So just because you adopt a policy that seems to contradict a previous policy, if you didn't do anything to resolve the policy that caused the conflict, I mean, trust me, the Catholic Church didn't give any money back. The Catholic Church didn't give any land back. None of these, so the role the Catholic Church has played in this genocide, they did nothing to correct it. So even if they changed a church policy by issuing a papal bull that perhaps has a different narrative than the doctrine of discovery, the idea of telling these Christian nations of Europe to enslave people and to take away their lands and their resources, just because you took a policy that no longer supported that activity doesn't mean you did anything to correct what you caused by those papal bulls in the first place. So I mean, and again, I think this film, Even the Rain, gives you a little bit of an idea. And even some of the tensions in the folks who want to pretend that they were so righteous about how this thing all plays out. But have you seen the film?
Not yet.
I'll leave you a copy to take a look at it. It is a very good film, and so I look forward to doing something with this. As I was saying before the show, this week in New York, I'm doing a 2-hour special. On Thursday, WBAI is essentially celebrating Mandela Day. So there's going to be special programming all day as a tribute to Nelson and Winnie Mandela, and the struggle, his incredible imprisonment, and then his rise as to lead South Africa, the whole bit. For me. And I think there certainly is a lesson that transcends the African experience and the Native experience, but among the things that I immediately go to when I think about Mandela and his life and his passing is Barack Obama eulogizing Nelson Mandela. So as he's standing in front, and it's all raining, but there's a huge crowd there, and so all these Africans are just enamored with this idea that a U.S. president, a black U.S. president, is there to eulogize Mandela, and Barack Obama goes on to talk about how blessed he feels like he has been. For his family, a black family, to have risen to the point of being the president and the first family of the United States, in spite of all the adversity, and really kind of demonstrating just how far they've come, right? And then he says, but there are still places in the world where young people have no hope for the future. And as he's saying that to an African crowd, you can't help but feel like, are you ignoring the fact that those are places like that right back home? The native territories of U.S. and Canada, where young native people, you don't have to go to third world countries. You don't have to go to Africa or South America or any place else to find areas where there are young people who have been deprived, who have had their hope and opportunity stolen from them. Because I'll tell you, Barack Obama, you were part of that. You were a part of that in the United States. Dakota Access Pipeline, that wasn't Trump's deal. That was yours. That was on your watch. And we've seen, mass deportations that took place under the Obama administration. So look, I'm troubled by celebrating some of these people who will step up as if they have done something grand when they've look, and there are plenty of very powerful politicians who are people of color, but you know what? They've made it. They are part of the ruling class now. And and while they may throw a scrap here and there to people of color, or maybe give a good blow some smoke up wherever on various issues relating to immigration or the oppression of people of color, they aren't really stepping up. They don't need to anymore. They've made it. And that's kind of the way I heard Obama's eulogy of Nelson Mandela. So I'm going to talk about that this Thursday in New York. And also, regardless of how people feel about Leonard Peltier, the one thing is clear, that his trial was a sham, and that today he sits in a federal prison as the longest serving political prisoner certainly in the history of the United States, but maybe even globally at this point. Yeah, and again, I'm not getting into a whole character conversation, or even this isn't about Eneme Akwash. This is about the trial that he went through, and the sham that it was, and that he still sits in a federal prison, based on on politics, not based on what they could prove in terms of his involvement in the death of two federal agents who they themselves were there to cause trouble. But anyway, so that's what I got going on in New York and on WBAI for our Mandela Day. I'll be talking about, again, the native political prisoner of record, as we talk about the life of Nelson Mandela, and look, however people feel about Winnie Mandela. While Nelson Mandela was in prison, Winnie Mandela was hardcore, and she was she was in the trenches doing work through that entire time. So, however the relationship ended up, at the end, you can't deny the solid work that Winnie Mandela did and the incredible, endurance and courage that Nelson Mandela displayed through his entire ordeal as being a political prisoner in apartheid South Africa. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on any of those.
I was just thinking in terms of the thing that Obama was known for was health care. But I think the people have to start understanding that their health care depends not only on their body, they have to start getting educated, learning
Mental health.
about themselves, and that'll help to release some of that tension, some of that anxiety, and some people, some downright depression. That, I think, is something that is being overlooked for a long time.
Well, and again, as much as Obama was known for healthcare, you have to understand he bolstered the health insurance industry, which is not the same. Insurance is not healthcare. Insurance is a financial product, and that's what was really created with Obamacare. And as you said, Ed, there are a lot of things that did not get that still have not been adequately addressed in terms of mental health and so much of the mental health issues that people suffer from. And it's funny with a lot of these things when you understand the intergenerational trauma that people of color have experienced, whether you're black, as a result of that slave era and Jim Crow and racism, blatant racism, an entire war fought within a country over the issue of slavery, or whether you're Native people and have suffered everything from massacres to genocide to slavery, and all these issues. Mental health doesn't get the attention, and in fact, one of the things that is clear. And again, I was listening to a program even this week about the opioid crisis. As long as it was just people of color who were having addiction problems, including and especially heroin, as long as it was just primarily black people, it wasn't a problem. But then when white people started experiencing it. All of a sudden, now it's all about treatment. It's not about punishment. It isn't about crime and punishment. Now it's about treatment and treating addiction as a disease. That wasn't the conversation, when it comes to people of color being lured into substance abuse, whether it was through crack cocaine or the availability of heroin. Look, one of the reasons that even some of the places in South America are such unpleasant places to live is because of the insatiable appetite of Americans for the drugs they consume. And the fact that they've created these drug cartels and gang violence in everything from South America to South America and Central America. I mean, all these places that have experienced some of this breakdown in their social fabric still has a lot to do with the American appetite for certain things. And when that appetite for some of the more debilitating drugs, not just, pure refined cocaine, as long as it was white people doing that was okay because they could be functional drug addicts. But the crack cocaine and the meth and the stuff that was really deteriorating human bodies, and then with the heroin crisis, and now that it's not just heroin, it's fentanyl, now all of a sudden everybody's treating it as this, this epidemic health crisis. It wasn't being treated as a health crisis when it was just people of color. So again, the racial component to the stuff is undeniable, and it makes it very, very difficult because again, the mental health issues, because now that you can treat drugs as a mental health issue, you say it all the time that a lot of these substances are substance abuse issues. They aren't the problem. They are a symptom of a problem. And usually the problem that they are a symptom of are mental health issues.
Yes. And I think that goes right back to what I was talking about, because people are talking about gun control. They're talking about all the different civic responsibilities that people are looking at, whether they're race related or not, doesn't matter. But they're looking at that, and I'm looking at what we have to understand is we have to learn those basic skill levels in order to be able to communicate, in order to be able to resolve an issue, whatever it may be, in a manner which is going to be understood and helpful to basically everyone involved. And if we don't do that, then there's no need to...
There's no pathway to resolution. None. I mean, the biggest thing with communication is, that gets missed is we don't recognize the cry for help.
Yeah.
We don't recognize the outreach that not only that people are putting out there as they're asking for help, but nor do we recognize how to offer that help. Right. That's all part of the very communication issues that you talk about.
Yeah, we don't even know how to listen to whatever it is that they're protesting or whatever it is they're speaking of and wanting to take care of. Take a look at the immigration policy of Trump. He thinks they're out to invade. And the fact of the matter is, they're here to work, basically. Most
but
I
don't think he even thinks that. I think that's the strategy, right? The strategy is to cast these people as a threat, and But this is again, we get back to the same place. There's this line that gets crossed where white privilege starts to become white fragility.
Yes.
And so when you have to realize, okay, we need to protect ourselves from a changing demographics. So a browning of America that was brown to start with. That's where some of this white privilege starts to diminish to the point where it starts to feel more like insecurity, and that's where white privilege becomes this white fragility. And look, I don't have a problem with treating many of these symptoms of mental illness, treating them the way that conversation is happening now. The problem I have is that it hasn't been always dealt that way. And so even today, as we're dealing with like the missing and murdered Indigenous women issues, those things are still being written off as just our people being discontent and running away. They want to treat every missing woman or missing boy as a runaway. And even if they are runaways, they're not addressing why are they runaways.
Yes.
So it's like you can always victim shame, or you say, well, the problem is it's their own behavior that's causing the problems for themselves, and that's the way people of color are being treated. But until it starts to hit home with white people, it doesn't become a national emergency, right?
That's true.
So. All right. So anyway, let's see. Today's only Saturday, right? Yeah, today's only Saturday. So we'll be back here on Tuesday. But I did want to prepare people for what we are going to do in New York on Thursday with the Mandela Day. And look, I'm going to still follow through some of this that's playing out with not just with the Santa Maria ship, but there was even like I said, a film crew that we may end up trying to meet with on maybe on Monday or before these guys head out of town. I think it's important that people realize if you're going to put a Columbus replica ship on display, then there's a whole lot of us that are not just going to let you tell tales of heroism. We're just not going to let you do it. Not with us offering our counter narrative to the Columbus story, the real narrative to the Columbus story, because it isn't this pageantry and celebration that should come that should be invoked with Columbus's name. The atrocities should be invoked, and that's what we're committed to doing that. So, and I understand that there are people from Spain and people from Italy in particular, Italian Americans, who have turned Columbus into their patron saint. Well, you should have chosen better. And there are many other better Italians that you could cling to than this sorry joker. So I guess we'll just go out on that. Thanks for listening. Again, you can see some of the pictures that we posted up during the show, and you can see them on my Facebook page. And maybe we'll have some more follow up with this as we go on. Maybe we'll catch some of the video footage that was taken, and we'll get to offer it up. This is John Kane with Ed Schindler and Jake Proud. We'll see you on Tuesday. Yahweh.
Yahweh.